Well, thanks for being here. Thanks for choosing this as your second breakout. My name is Ben, and I live in downtown Fort Worth. Did campus ministry at TCU for about 10 years, and then taught at TCU for about 5 years, and got to do campus ministry from kind of inside as well, which was really fun and different. And a lot of what we tried to do, just for a little bit of context, is kind of play with the kind of standard model of campus ministry, and rather than pull college kids off campus to have fun and that kind of stuff, we try to do that some, obviously, because fun is important. Christians don't know how to have fun very well, so we should have fun. But we'd also try to encourage them to, become leaders in their organizations and dorms and apartment complexes, and maybe for some of them leave their Christian organizations and join non-Christian organizations and kind of really be that salt and light that Jesus calls us to be, and go out into the darkness. Because we know this, like there's not an ability for darkness to overtake light. Darkness is just the absence of light, right? And so if we're going to penetrate the darkness, if we're going to push back darkness, to say it spiritually, means we have to go out into the darkness. And occasionally God will lead someone onto our turf, but more often than not, we have to go onto, quote unquote, their turf and enter the rest of the world. And that's not like just for the elite followers of Jesus. Like, that's part of what God calls all of us to. And God just bore some fruit through that. And so it leads a little bit to this conversation today. Of going, how do we talk about Jesus in everyday ways as if he's actually really good news? So I'm going to ask you to talk back with me for a little bit. We'll have some time to pair up and have some conversation as well. I'm just not going to talk at you for the full hour. So hopefully that'll be between first to lunch and me not talking about you for the full hour, just trying to thread the needle and this being the best hour of your conference so far. So, but let me pray. So Father, thank you for today. Thank you for this crew. Thank you that we get to spend a little bit of time asking the question on behalf of our campuses and on behalf of our friends and neighbors and classmates, and those in our ministries and those who will be part of our ministries next year that don't even know you yet, as we consider this question of how do you sound like really good news. So would you teach us? Would you speak to us? Would you be our primary voice in our head? It's in your Son's name. Amen. All right, I'm going to ask you to do two things. One is I'm just going to give you like 10 seconds and just pray, God, would you bring someone in my life, into my mind, who doesn't know Jesus? So preferably someone on your campus, but if it's someone in your family or whatever else, if that's what God wants, I'm not going to argue him. So just 10 seconds, would you bring someone in, not some general, like, a guy I saw walking that day who looked like a heathen, but just like an actual name, face. Okay, so Father, would you bring someone to mind that doesn't know Jesus? All right, then I'm going to ask you to answer yes or no to two questions. First, do you believe the gospel is good news for that person? Yes. Let's try a little more gusto. Do we believe the gospel is good news for that person? Okay. Do we believe the gospel is still good news? Yes. All right. That's all you need to know. Go to your next breakout. Okay. Do you know how to speak the gospel as if it's good news to the person that came to mind? It's a little harder of a question, right? Yeah. And some of this goes back to this question I want to ask. I was like, when you were taught how to share if you've been ever taught how to share the gospel, what did it look like? Like, how were you taught to share the gospel? Anyone?
Romans Road,
yeah, which is God's truth, and so it's a good thing, and also doesn't mean a lot for someone who doesn't trust the authority of the Bible, right?
Yeah.
How else were you taught to share the gospel here? 3 circles. Very Trinitarian. Yeah. Which, again, both of these ways, like, let's not swing the pendulum too far. God shows up in sometimes, and it, quote unquote, works for some people, right? What else were you taught? Personally, here's my story. Can't argue with my story. It's part of why we use our stories. Okay. What else? Okay.
By example?
Yeah, by example. Yeah. Yeah. So there's all these different like methods, right? And again, I'll say a couple times just so we don't swing too far. God shows up in everything. God shows up in like the angry guy on a soapbox yelling angrily about how good Jesus is, which is massively ironic. Right? He's really good news, and I sound like I hate you. Like God uses all these things, and also a lot of the methods of evangelism or apologetics, apologetics is just basically saying like, hey, this is real, right? If you really boil it down to a lot of the ways that are kind of common in the Western church, in the circles that we live in, don't actually sound like good news to the questions that your peers are asking. A lot of it might have sounded like really good news to the like very intellectual, like 1970s, like how old is the Earth kind of questions. I don't know anyone on campuses outside of maybe geology majors who are asking how old the Earth is. Maybe you do. Maybe that keeps you up at night. You'd be rare, I think. But there's a lot of the kind of ways that we've been taught to share Jesus' good news that answer some people's questions. But if that's the only way we know how to talk about Jesus' good news, it leaves a lot of people going, I have questions still. And so the cold call knock at the door, if you die tonight, do you know where you're going to go? That kind of thing. Do your peers lie awake at night thinking about life after death very often? But by and large, not. I can't remember the survey, but it was something like before age 53, like people rarely think about anything after death, rarely think about death. Unless like there's some tragedy or funeral or something like that. But by and large, like that's not the common thought. Do you have any friends who don't believe that sin is a thing? Sure. If you know folks who don't believe in Jesus, like Jesus died for your sins so you can go to heaven, like there's a lot in that sentence that they just discount and write off as superstition or this kind of stuff. If that's all I'm saying is if that's like the one play we have, and we get through the Romans Road or the circles, if that's the one play we have is that Jesus died for your sins so you can go to heaven, or the scary method, Jesus died for your sins so you don't have to go to hell. If that's the one method we have, like that works for some people. That sounds like good news to some people, and it just doesn't sound like good news to a whole lot of other people. Does Jesus offer good news beyond just eternity? Does Jesus offer good news today? Yeah. And so that's some of the question of going, okay, how do we speak the good news in ways that doesn't discount the really good news of eternity, but also meets you in the actual questions you're asking today? Okay? So that's where we're headed. Tim Keller, now the late Tim Keller, said this in 2003, but he's talking about 23. He's talking about 2021. And just to set the stage for us, he said, as of 2021, the number of nones, you know this term, people who don't identify with any established religion, the number of nones in the U.S. had grown to nearly 30% of the population, while professing Christians are 63%, down from 75 only a decade ago. So he's pointing to the fact that less people believe in Jesus, say they believe in Jesus, than they did a decade ago. Pew Research Center projected the future of this trend, and they did 4 scenarios. In 3 of them, the percentage of Christians plunges to less than half the population by 2070, and in none of the 4 scenarios does the trend reverse and the church grow. Okay, it's 2021, 4 years ago. Okay, then he asked the question, can Christianity grow again? And he says, thankfully, yes, it can. Even the Pew Report concedes that, quote, events outside the study's model could lead to a revival. The events mentioned include immigration patterns, religious innovations, and then if you've ever read much Tim Keller, you know that he looks at all the data and then goes, but actually here's something even smarter than that. He said, as I see it, growth can happen if the church learns to talk compellingly to non-Christian people. If the church learns to speak compellingly to non-Christian people. Because here's the deal. The whole survey, the whole model was on the organization, like the church, like Christianity as a broad construct. And he's saying it starts at the personal level. Like the church, which is to say the people of God, we've got to learn how to talk compellingly to folks who don't know Jesus. Fair? That's 4 years ago. Interestingly, anybody read the New York Times? I kind of thought so. Way to be. So on Easter of this year, the New York Times released a study that showed, among other studies that have come out, like this trend is actually reversing right now. 4 years. And Dr. Keller's no longer with us to see it, but in a short 4 years, this is reversed. This is an Easter Sunday story from the religion writer whose name is Lauren Jackson. She was an ex-Mormon, but like many Christians, like walked out of the church, was living a not Christian life. Here's how she ends this really long, really beautifully written article. She still doesn't believe, and even if she did, it'd be Mormon, whatever. But so here's how she ends the article. She says, I want a God. I want it all to be true. Miracles, souls, some sort of cosmic alchemy that makes sense of the chaos. It's a good phrase, isn't it? For years, I haven't been able to say that publicly, but it feels like something is changing. Maybe the culture is shifting. Maybe we're starting to recognize it's possible to be both believing and discerning after all. Now, to be fair, she's talking about religion as a whole. She's not talking about Christ-centered Christianity, but we fit within that broad category as a secular reporter would write about it. And as you see this, again, this is her sharing. She did a lot of objective reporting, but this is how she ended. Do you see intellect in this? Or logic in this? What do you see in her own personal conclusion here?
I feel a lot of feeling.
Yeah, there's a personal connection. There's some, I'll take it beyond feelings. There's a desire here. I want it to be true. I want there to be something. There's an experiential relationship she's having with religion that makes her go, this is changing. And I think if we're going to talk about speaking about Jesus if he's good news, that's a huge key to tap into. Because again, there's some folks who want and need to be intellectually proven, that need to have their doubts. Thomas, like, I won't do this until I see, until I touch. Nicodemus came to Jesus with tons of doubt, and Jesus met him logically in his Pharisaical logic. But for a lot of people that Jesus met, and for a lot of people on your campus, like, they're not asking the intellectual questions, but they're all experiencing things. I'm not saying anything you don't know. I'm hopefully just like putting some words to what's going on. You have an experiential generation. And if something is true or not, frankly, matters less to do I believe it? Do I experience it? Is that fair? For some people, it's like, well, this is objectively right, but I don't care. I don't want it to be right. And so in my mind, it's not going to be, I don't care if it's right or not. You have any of those conversations sometimes? So Romans Road doesn't meet that person. Like, great, this is what you believe. I don't care. Well, crap. I don't have any other play now. But if what she's saying is true, then there's a way to speak about the gospel as if it meets the experiential questions, the needs, the stories that your peers, classmates, coworkers, dorm mates, whatever else are asking. So, cool? All right, so that's where we're going. Starting point, gut response. Say it out loud. What do you think of when you hear the word gospel?
Good news.
Good news. That's literally the translation. So yes, good job. What else do you think of when you hear the word gospel? Jesus. Okay. I mean, those are the two best possible answers. The gospel is the good news of Jesus. What else? Freedom. Yeah. That's good. It's an experiential thing too, right? What else?
I think of the conversation, talking and listening.
Talking and listening, yeah. So if you're sharing the gospel, there's some talking and listening, which is great. Christians are not known for listening. We'll come back to that in a minute. Anything else?
A lot of hope.
Hope.
Probably the most sense of the word I probably feel.
Yeah. Which is, again, it's an experiential thing. People are looking for hope, right? It's good. The gospel is all of these things. It is the good news of Jesus. It is hope. It is freedom. It is all these things. And yet, when we talk about it, we go into these like empirical truths that don't sound a lot like hope or freedom or experiential at all. In fact, if I can summarize it, I think most Christians share 2/3 of the gospel. And this can be a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but the first third is the gospel is a historic reality, right? We talk about it as if it's fact. Do we believe it's fact? Do we believe it's historical reality? Yes. Not denying this at all. There was a real man named Jesus of Nazareth. He really lived. He really died. He really rose. He's reigning now. He'll reign in full forever. Like that's all we have. If we don't have that, we have nothing. And so the gospel is a historic reality. Let's never move away from it. And yet, when we talk about it, it's almost like we talk about it as a historic reality, which, if I can be a little bit silly, greatly benefits my future. He died on the cross so that what? I get to heaven. He died on the cross so I don't have to go to hell. Past, future. He did this, I win in the end. Now, again, is that true? Praise God, it's true. That's really good news. But also, if that's all the gospel is, what's missing from that?
Everything in between.
Everything in between, yeah. We get past and we get future. What about present? What are most of your friends, classmates, family members, loved ones thinking about? Past and future? Maybe like tomorrow or my next job. If you just graduated, you're thinking about the future, right? So we think about what you're going to do in the summer. But as far as like the meta version of this, we live in a present society. We live in the now for the now. And so the gospel in truth, the holistic gospel, is that it is a historic reality. It does greatly benefit our future and also impacts every single moment of our present life. Fair? How do we speak about it as if it's good news today? So if you have a Bible or an app, I'm going to be in Colossians chapter 4, because I think Paul actually helps us with this and helps us speak the whole 3/3 gospel as if it matters today, and as if it actually has answers to questions that your friends are asking, as if it actually meets the needs that your non-believing neighbors are asking. But here's the kind of big claim that makes this whole thing work, is that there are dozens of ways to speak the one objective gospel to different people's subjective situations. Can I say it again? There's dozens of ways to speak God's one objective gospel to people's subjective situations. I want to be very clear. There's one Jesus. There's one way, truth, and light. There's one gospel. There's one good news. There's one life, death, resurrection. And yet, it can sound like really good news in dozens, maybe hundreds of different ways. Okay? Here's what I mean. In Colossians, Paul is going to show us two things. One is watching and praying for open doors, and the second is speaking the good news into people's stories. Watching and praying for open doors, speaking the good news into people's stories. Here's the first half of that. Paul writes, he's talking to his friends at Colossae. He says he's praying for them. And then he says also, at the same time, pray also for us, that God may open to us a door for the word, to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I am in prison. Pray that I may make it clear, which is how I ought to speak. All right, to be clear, is salvation reliant on you? No. Salvation's reliant on God alone. Salvation is of the Lord, he says clearly in Jonah and Romans, and it's a theme throughout the Bible. So Paul, though, he's in jail, as he says, and he invites his friends at Colossae to pray that God would open doors for him and that God would give him the words to make clear the message that he's called to speak. I don't know if your tradition said this. The tradition that I came to know Jesus in talked about Paul and called him the best missionary in Christian history. Anyone ever heard that before? Paul's outside of Jesus. Jesus is the best, but outside of Jesus, Paul's the best missionary in Christian history. Heard that? So if Paul's the best missionary in Christian history, who's not the best missionary in Christian history? You, me, none of it. If he's the best, all of us are best, second best, right? So if Paul is utterly reliant on God to open doors, and if Paul is utterly reliant on God to give him the words to speak, and utterly reliant on God to make it clear, and he's the best of the Christian missionaries, it's at least worth asking, how much more are we reliant on God? Like if he had the most, pedigree, and we don't, and he's utterly reliant, then we have to be even more reliant. And so I'm convinced, and this is not a guilt thing, it's just observation of 25 years of pastoring and being on a college campus for a long time. I'm convinced one of the reasons that followers of Jesus don't talk about Jesus is that we're not asking God to open our eyes to see opportunities. We're not asking for him to give us words to speak. And so maybe for you, the only reason God had you come into this room is just that, just to want to pray for it. And if that's a step that you're not doing, then praise God. That's maybe an invitation from the Lord to watch and pray for open doors. And what's crazy is once we do this, turns out God answers prayer. You believe that? So if you pray for open doors, like God opens doors. And there's a couple, I want to make this tangible for you. So like there's a couple of common open doors, not like 100% guarantee or your money back kind of stuff, but there's a couple of open doors that God commonly invites us to walk through. The first is just everyday conversations. Talk to me. What are some things that you talk about with your friends and family? Loved ones. School. Why do you talk about school?
Like futuristic stuff, like your future and where you see yourself.
Yeah. And why are those things good to talk about?
Because it's important.
It's important. Yeah, future's important. School's, depending on the day, feels important, right? What else do you talk about in just normal everyday life?
Talk about what you did that day.
Talk about what you did that day.
Connecting and
Yeah.
sharing life.
Yeah. And as you do, you talk about the parts of your day you value the most, right? Or the highlights of it, or this kind of, or lowlights, depending. Yeah. What else do you talk about?
You're passionate about?
Things you're passionate about. Yeah. Anything else?
Well, I mean, I have coworkers who talk about politics with me.
Yeah. Why do they talk about politics?
It's really important.
Because it's really important. Yeah. That's the thing. Like we talk about things we love. We talk about things that we need. We talk about things that are important to us, right? Would you say Jesus is important to you?
Absolutely.
Okay. Does he come up in conversation as much as things like politics and school and future? So there's a little bit of a disconnect, right? And so here's the deal. Like there's got to be a space between like forcing him into the conversation. Oh, your leg's broken. It reminds me of my heart. It was broken. I needed Jesus. You need Jesus. Like, whoa, got to be a better way than that. There's got to be a way to not force, but also to not like ignore him or pretend he's not important to us or pretend he's not valuable. So what are you going to do this weekend? Oh, I've got an event with one of my organizations on Saturday night and then Sunday morning. And then Sunday afternoon, I'm going to go home and do some laundry. Like, what if we just let him be a part of our natural life and didn't shy away from him? Again, not like trying to ramrod him into every conversation, but talking about him as if he's as important as the laundry you're going to go do, and letting him just be naturally there. So that's one common open door, is just in the context of everyday conversation. A second one is as we listen well to others. And I love that you said listen and speak as we talk about Jesus. Listening, I mean, gosh, it's not just Christians. Like humans don't get like high credit for being able to listen well to each other, right? Like, and people just are desperate to be heard. People are desperate to have their opinion and voice valued. And so if we can learn to listen well, it can provide open doors. This isn't new to your generation. This isn't new in 2025. The Proverbs talks about this. As the author says, the purpose of a person's heart is like deep water. And you kind of get the image. Like there's a lot going on in here, right? All the time. There's emotions, there's swirling things, there's good things, there's bad things. There's a lot going on. But a person of understanding will draw it out. And so if we're wise, then there's ways to really draw out what's going on under the surface of what someone is saying. How are you today? Fine. Okay, just fine, or like fine in a good way? And you'd be amazed at the people that like pause and be like, oh, you actually want to know? And sure, there's a simple question there that can go be like, no, actually, like I'm really good today. Or, yeah, actually only fine because... And if they find a listening ear, folks are very, very excited to tell you. Maybe for a long, long time, so it's a risk that you're taking. But just being willing to ask a question, to draw out, like, I'm not going to settle for the first answer you give. I'm going to at least take another step. And as we listen, we hear things like identity. Where's our identity supposed to be found? In Jesus. That's even true for people who don't know Jesus. They're still created in the image of God, right? Raise your hand if you ever, even as a follower of Jesus, find other places to put your identity in. Yep. So it turns out we have a lot in common with our non-believing friends, and we can relate to them on that level. And so, what does it look like to kind of discern if there's some identity statements? You're putting a lot of your hope in what your new boss thinks of you. You're putting a lot of your hope in this political party or the other one. We hear pains and disappointments. We hear fears, and we hear what people long for and hope. And they don't put it in this word. You know what I'm really longing for today? But it's a thing they talk about over and over and over again, right? And we start to hear if we're discerning. I have a friend who is a pilot, and at the beginning of COVID, like right after COVID shut down in 2020, he had just calculated his way to the right timing to jump onto the next biggest plane in his fleet. And if you know anything about the pilot world, you essentially you get to be senior in whatever plane, and then if you want to jump to the next plane, you go back to the very bottom of the list on that plane, and you're assigned the worst flights and that kind of thing. It also meant that after doing all this calculation of this is the right time for my wife, for my kids, this kind of stuff, he was jumping to this new plane, and the people at the bottom of whatever list were the first to be furloughed when COVID hit. And so we're out on a walk one day, obviously social distanced. We're out on a walk one day, and he's like, I'm just really fearful that I'm going to be furloughed. So he said it outright. He's like, I'm fearful that I'm going to be furloughed, and I don't know what that means for my family. I don't know. Everybody's fearful in March of 2020. He was naming a specific fear, and he goes, I just don't know what to do. He knows I'm a follower of Jesus. And I said, man, I that is a very valid fear, right? Is that a valid fear to lose your job, even if you don't have wife and kids to provide for it? It was a valid fear. And I was like, one time, a couple years ago, I was working for an organization and they had to downsize. And so I found out with 2 days notice that I was going to lose my job. And I was like, what's really cool. And I was like, this is my story, not yours, so I can't promise you anything. But I was like, about a month after that, this other organization called that was probably a better fit for my gifts and passions. It happened to pay a little bit more as well. And I never would have known that opportunity was there if I hadn't been let go. And so it wasn't actually as bad as I thought it was. And I was like, now again, it's COVID, nobody knows anything. Except at that point, it was it'll be over in a week. And I was like, I can't promise you anything like that, but have you ever had a situation like that in your life where you didn't know what was next, and then I think I said something and then something fell into your lap or something? Wasn't being too spiritual yet. And he goes, actually, yeah, I hadn't thought about this in a long time. When I got out of the military, I didn't know what I was going to do, and then this airline called and offered me this job, and I wouldn't have been pursuing it. I was pursuing other things. And I was like, that's really cool. And I said, in my mind, I'm a follower of Jesus. I believe that God gave me that opportunity that I wouldn't have been looking for if I was looking for it myself. And he goes, do you think God gave me that opportunity? I'm like, do you think God gave you that opportunity? And he's like, if God did that for you, maybe God did that for me. He goes, and if God did that for me, maybe God would do that for me again. And he goes, do you think we could pray that God would either save me from being furloughed or give me a good job if I do? I was like, I think we can probably pray for that. And it was just this moment of asking questions, hearing his fear, and the answer wasn't, well, we can pray for that, or we can pray for your soul because right now you're dying and going to hell. But then we can pray for it. It's not that, right? It's actually just meeting him in the question he's asking and the fear that he's feeling, and go, I believe. It's a risk, right? Because we didn't know what God was going to do. I was like, we can pray for that, and also I'll continue to pray for that until God answers your job. And then he didn't get furloughed, and he goes, God didn't let me lose my job. It's like that. It still doesn't believe, but gave God the credit. And there's a step there, there's a seed there, there's something that happened there, right? That moved him more toward the Lord. Make sense? Okay. So everyday conversations, listening well to others, answering people's questions. We live in a world where everybody loves to share their opinions, and then the polite thing to do is, if you let them share their opinion, is for them to ask you your opinion. Even if they only ask you, for you to then be able to ask them, and they just really want to tell you what you should believe. There's an opportunity to answer questions in a safe way that doesn't get into stuff of faith or take too many risks, or there's an opportunity to actually answer as if Jesus is important to you. So a couple of friends who adopted a baby a couple years ago, and the baby that they were matched with was so laced with drugs when the mom got to the hospital, the baby would have had to be in the NICU for like months, born very premature, but wasn't born premature because of the drugs. The reason that the mom had gotten into labor is because the guy that she was living with, I don't know the scenario, but the guy she was living with had beat her so badly that it induced labor. And she was rushed to the hospital, had a baby like in the 20-something of weeks. And if you're pre-med or med, like, that's super risky. And had like all these complications. And this is the baby that my friends were matched with, and they said yes to. And so they were at the NICU for months, like before work, after work, as much as they could. They were in the infant ICU, caring for the baby, praying for the baby, just with the baby. Their caseworker, who's not a believer, asked him one time, "Why did you say yes?" Like there's all these, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know mental capacity. Like there's a lot of drugs and a lot of like physical harm that's been done. Like you don't know what's going to happen with this baby. You could have passed. And as I was talking to my friend, he literally said, he's like, there was an opportunity to like give her a safe answer. Like, well, we've been on the list for a couple of years, which is a real thing in the adoption world. We've been on the list for a couple of years. We didn't know when the next opportunity would come along. So we said yes. Like that would have been true, and it would have been safe. Or like you called us and we just prayed about it and said yes. But he said he felt like he used the word open door. He's like, I feel like God was asking me to step through an open door here. My friend was saved when he was 19 years old and in prison. And so he told the caseworker, he said, he told that story. He said, when I was 19 years old, I was in prison. I was laced with drugs. I had been beaten really, really badly. And I was in a system that didn't care for me. And someone introduced me to the unconditional love of Jesus, knowing full well that I could not get to a better place. But as one of you said, like he met me exactly as I was, accepted me for who I was, and brought me into a better story. Every time I say this, I choke up. He goes, when I see this baby, I see a physical representation of who I was spiritually when I was 19 years old. And I want to show that same love to this child that God showed me. And so we're saying yes to this baby, no matter what mental capacity is, no matter what is. Like, that doesn't matter. This is the love of Christ. And the caseworker goes, I've never heard something like that before. And it opened up a huge opportunity for them to continue to have conversations. So answering people's questions. And then finally, you may roll your eyes at this, but a common open door is praying for people. And like not just praying for them silently after the fact, but actually like in the moment praying for folks. And again, this may sound weird. Far more post-secular places like Vancouver, Canada. We were in Australia for 6 weeks last summer doing some work with churches. This is as true there as it is here. And if it's true there, then it has to be more true in our like still kind of religious Texas university world. If you offer to pray for someone, they will almost always say yes. Why? If they don't believe in anything that you believe in, why will they still say yes if you offer to pray? Any guesses?
They're looking for hope. They're probably like, what is there to lose?
Yeah, it's a lot of that. Like, sure, you can say words to nobody that you think lives in the sky. Why not? I'm not no loss for that, right? They look at it as like a kind of gesture. It's almost like I'm going to wish you well before I walk away kind of thing. And so it's to your point, it's kind of a no loss for them. And here's the deal. Like, even if they don't believe what you're praying is true, you do. And so you believe God is the God of healing or the God of provision or this kind of stuff. And so it's actually a really humbling reminder to go like, God, this person has a need. I don't know how to meet it, but I want to pray because I believe that you can meet it, that you would actually meet this person in their need. And maybe something clicks. Maybe it's a little seed, which is really all we can do. Again, like we scatter seeds, old parable, farmer scatters seeds. He goes to bed and wakes up and there's a crop there. By his power? No, like it's the Lord who produces the crop. So we don't know. So praying might just be some seed that clicks down the road. Or tying together listening well and praying. Like if you follow up with that person a week later and you actually remember what you prayed for, that might be the most caring thing anyone's ever said to that person. And so there's these opportunities, these common open doors. Does this make sense? Again, there's more than this, but commonly these are ways that God opens doors for us to declare the mystery of the faith. Any questions, thoughts before I move on? Stories where you've seen this? All right, that was a put you on the spot kind of question, so I'll move on. So, okay, so that's the first half, is praying for open doors, praying and watching for open doors. The second half is then actually walking through those open doors and stepping into the stories and sharing the gospel as if it's actually good news. So Paul in Colossians, I'm going to repeat a little bit. So pray that I may make it clear which is how I ought to speak. Then he encourages his friends at Colossae, walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech, so that they are talking, they're not just, sharing the gospel, and if you have to use words, they're not doing that, they're talking. Let your speech be gracious and seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer each person. All right, what are some principles that you see that Paul says as we engage the world around us, as he opens doors? What are some words, some principles that stick out? Walk in wisdom. Okay, walk in wisdom. So be wise, be discerning, be prayerful. Because where does wisdom come from? It comes from the Lord. Yeah. What else?
Being gracious.
Being gracious. And again, Christians, as we talk about Jesus to non-believers, are just not known for being gracious as much as being really demeaning and really angry and really elitist. Salty language meant something different in the Bible than it does today. So seasoned with salt is a picture of, like, we hear about this a lot. Like it's preserving, and it's life-giving. And this, like, seasoned with salt means, like, make your words tasteful. Things taste better with salt. Everything tastes better with salt, right? So don't like heap it on, but like make it tasteful. Make your words tasteful to who? To you? No, make your words tasteful to them. And so it's considering grace and wisdom and saltiness. And then I think this last part's the key. And some of your Bibles may translate this so that you may know how you ought to answer everyone. Anyone's Bible say that? If your Bible says that, it's a little bit of a generality. It'd be like saying, like, oh, go talk to all the college kids. As if, like, there's one block and one way to talk to all the college kids, right? This is actually the literal translation, and it acknowledges this. Everyone you know has a unique history, unique story, unique questions they're asking, unique needs. Each person has a different life. And so the opportunity that God often gives us, if we're wise, prayerful, salty, is to speak the gospel into your story, which is different than your story, which is different than your story, which is different than your story. That's what he means when he says answer each person. Is it nearly as efficient as just go talk to everyone in the same way all at once? Not nearly as efficient. And yet, like we've been saying, the everyone all at once in the same way doesn't answer the questions that you have, which are different than the needs you have, which are different than the history that you have, et cetera, et cetera. Make sense? So the way we talk about this in our church a lot is that there's one gospel, and the gospel is like a diamond, because it's precious and beautiful, but also that there's a lot of different angles that you can see the diamond from that make it look beautiful. Fair? If you've ever seen a diamond commercial, if you ever used to watch TV before streaming services took over everything, diamonds are always against a black background, and they're always doing what? Yeah, they're turning, they're rotating, they're spinning. Why?
The vantage point is like a point of view.
Yeah. The more of the diamond you see, the more sparkle, the more kind of luminescent, the more beautiful it looks as it spins and spins and spins. And so it turns and it looks more and more beautiful. Here's my proposal. In saying there's dozens of different ways to speak the one objective gospel to people's subjective stories, there's one Jesus, there's one life, death, resurrection, way, truth, light. There's one Jesus, and yet he's going to sound like good news from a lot of different ways. So, put you on the spot question, and I'll go first. When the gospel sounded like good news to you, what truth about Jesus kind of made you come alive? When God saved you, what truth of the gospel made it sound like good news? Because for some of us, it was like death to life or eternity. For me, and then I'll let you share, I was a deeply dissatisfied guy toward the end of high school and early college years. And so I would try to find satisfaction in a lot of different things, primarily leadership positions, which is just another way of saying I like to control people. And then relationships, which is also another way of saying other things. But I would try to just find satisfaction, and then it satisfy me for a little bit, and then I'd get bored and want more and want more and want. It was this insatiable search for more. So what made Jesus sound like good news to me was the fact that God promised satisfaction, like eternal satisfaction, true satisfaction, satisfaction that wouldn't let me down. And that may sound so obvious to you, but for 21-year-old me, like it hit me like a ton of bricks. And just made Jesus sound like really good news. Now, is satisfaction the only truth of the gospel? Is that the whole gospel? No, but for 21-year-old me, that's all it took. I grew up in church. I'd heard the Easter story, heard the death to life and the life after death. I've heard that my whole life. I thought I believed. But it became real when God promised that he would satisfy. What was it for you? Yeah.
His peace.
His peace.
The stillness.
Yeah.
And the ability just to be still within him.
Yeah. Yeah. Is peace and stillness the entirety of the gospel? Is that all God promises?
No.
It is not. But for you, it met you in your story at that moment.
Yeah.
It made the gospel sound like good news. It's good. Yeah.
His authority and control.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. In a world of
Dominion.
chaos and a lot of different people clamoring for control. Yeah. Is his authority and control the only good news of the gospel? No. Is it one very real part that sounded like good news to you? Yeah. What do you say?
That he knew my mess and still decided to.
Yeah. Knows your mess and just dives in anyway. He doesn't abandon you. Yeah. Yeah. Is that the whole gospel? No. Was it really good news to you at a certain moment? Absolutely. So you see what we're doing. And also there's a piece of this that goes, man, every time I get to do this in a room, like there's someone, I haven't thought about control and authority in a long time. And it's a new angle of the gospel that we get to hear and go, gosh, that wasn't it for me. But that's really cool that it was it for you. And you just get to celebrate the work of the Lord and see like there's innumerable angles, innumerable truths, innumerable promises that make Jesus sound like better and better and better news. Fair? So if we only know how to speak the gospel through some like empirical Romans road, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, that may sound like really good news if that's the specific angle that someone is searching for, right? At the same time, if I only know how to share the gospel through the angle of satisfaction, because that's what worked for me, it's probably not the right way to say it, but it worked for me, then that's great if you're also dissatisfied. But if you're generally satisfied, but really lonely, like I don't know how to share the gospel with you if all I know is satisfaction. Does that make sense? And the beauty of this reality is that the gospel is joy to the joyless and hope to the hopeless and satisfaction to the dissatisfied and companionship for the lonely and freedom for the oppressed and justice for those who have been put down on and reconciliation for the broken and redemption for the hurting and forgiveness for the sinful and on 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 the diamond turns. And if we listen well, and we realize there's someone who's deeply sad, deeply lonely. The New York Times article talked about the benefits of religion and just compared like suicidal thoughts for those without any religion to suicidal thoughts of those with any religion. And again, it's any religion, but it's a massive difference. And mental health struggles and all this kind of stuff. It's not saying we won't struggle with this kind of stuff, but there's good news in the midst of it. Like the scriptures talk about how we suffer, yes, but we suffer as those with hope. And so there's promise in this. And everyone around you, I know this sounds like a blanket statement. I stand by it. Everyone around you is looking for hope and finding it in something. And everyone around you is looking for joy and finding it in something. And everyone around you is looking for satisfaction and finding it in something. And everyone around you is struggling with innumerable things and are looking for the answers to those things. And you believe you have the answer. It's just a question of you believe these things, you know these things to be true. Can we get past our Jesus died for you so you can go to heaven kind of mentality? Make sense? I have a friend named Nick who is a night security guard at one of these like big warehouse facilities. And like 3 a.m, a few years ago, one of his other guards came up to him in their little like office. They were watching the monitors. And as Nick tells the story, he goes, the guy looks at me and he goes, "You're a Christian, right?" And Nick's like, he didn't say it in like a happy way where like I thought it was going to lead to this great conversation. It's like 3 a.m, this accusation, like you're a Christian, right? And Nick's like, "Yeah." And the guy goes, "I do drugs. What would your Jesus say about that?" Now, 3 a.m. What would you say if that were you? Like, so for Nick, like all these things flood into my, like, he's like, the first thing is just like, I just don't want to have this conversation. I'm just tired. He's like, I just want to say like, I don't know. And he's like, okay, but I just told the guy I'm a Christian. So if I say I don't know, he's going to be like, well, you don't know what your own God says? He's like, so I can't say that. He goes, the second thing that came to my mind is Jesus would say, stop it. Is that valid? Sure. Like, did Jesus probably not want the guy to do drugs? Probably. But if that was the answer, like, then what perception of God is Nick giving this guy?
Is it rules?
Yeah. Only care about rules. Maybe no fun. Jesus doesn't want me to have fun.
Jesus is better.
Do what?
Jesus is better.
Jesus is better?
Yeah.
That sounds positive.
Yeah.
He didn't think that this guy would receive that as positive, though. So, stop it wasn't the answer. He's like, so maybe it's like Jesus would call that a sin. He said he died for that sin so you can go to heaven one day. He resurrected so that you can be with him forever. He's like, but the guy doesn't believe like half the words in that sentence. So you know what he said? Again, 3 a.m. Spot on. He goes, I think Jesus would tell you you're putting your hope in something that lets you down. And he goes, and I think you know it lets you down because you have to take a hit 3 or 4 times a day. He goes, I think Jesus would tell you he's a better place to put your hope because he'll never let you down. Like, that's good. And again, I've intentionally told you like some stories that don't have like the pretty bow. Like we like to put like pretty bows on this. The guy did not go, let's go flush my drugs immediately. Like it wasn't that. But the guy did go like, I've never heard anyone talk about God like that before. And if that's who God is, I would love to talk more about him.
Yeah.
And then they didn't get to because the guy got fired the next day for doing drugs at work. But again, maybe there's some seed that like there's some like, wow, some light bulb came on for the guy that wouldn't have come on. And that's just one example among 1,000 of going, he spoke to a specific, very blunt question. We're probably not going to get that. Like, I'm finding my identity in this. What would Jesus say about that? Like, it's rare, but it was real for Nick in that instance. And if we listen well, we can hear the same thing, the longings, the hope, this kind of stuff. And he was able to share the gospel to a very specific need. Good? Thoughts, questions? Okay. I told you I'd let you out early. We're going to do one thing and then wrap up. I would love for you just to pair off because I want to make this tangible for you and give you an opportunity to actually like personalize this. You've honored me by listening to me for a while, so thank you. But just pair off whether you know the person sitting next to you or don't. I would love for you to like reflect on this and just share like what angle or angles of the gospel first sounded like good news to you. Maybe it's one, maybe it was a few. But just real briefly, just share that. And let that be an encouragement for each other as well. Of like, maybe it's the exact same thing. Praise God. Maybe it's something you never thought of before. Jesus is even bigger than that. So just share that. And then the person I asked you to think of at the beginning, like what angles of the gospel might sound like good news, actual good news, not just intellectual, theoretical, ethereal good news, but to some question they're asking or some need they have. And if you're willing to be honest, if like you didn't have anyone come to mind, if you don't know someone who's not a follower of Jesus, then that's okay too. You don't have to make something up or pretend. But again, maybe the prayer for you is that this summer or as you go back to school in the fall or whatever fall looks like for you, God might put someone in your life and go, maybe it's that person. So fair?
Yeah.
So which angle sounded like good news to you? Which angle or angles might sound like good news to that person? If you have questions, I'll be up here, and then I'll tie us up here. I will not tie us up. I will wrap us up or tie us off here in about 5 minutes. So just do this briefly. Take 5 minutes.